Hi everyone, I'm Jessica Stutzman and welcome back to the Millcreek Government Channel. Aquatic invasive species are non-native plants, animals, and other organisms that have evolved to live primarily in water and aquatic habitats rather than on land. With us today is Sarah Stallman, Extension Leader for the Pennsylvania Sea Grant, to inform us of the most pressing aquatic threats to the Lake Erie ecosystem. Sarah, thank you for joining us here today. It's so nice to have you back on the show.
Happy to be back yet again.
Okay, so remind us just very quickly, what is Pennsylvania Sea Grant?
Sure. So Pennsylvania Sea Grant is part of a very broad program. So there's 34 programs all throughout the United States. Any state that has any type of shoreline, whether it's Great Lakes or ocean coastline, has a Sea Grant program and a university that's affiliated with it. So here in Pennsylvania, we have Pennsylvania Sea Grant, and we're affiliated with Penn State University. And what we do is we kind of act as a bridge between science and people. We take scientific information and we work with stakeholders and decision makers to bring that science so that they can use that in their decision making.
And where's your office located at?
Our office is located in the Tonbridge Environmental Center here in Erie, but we also have offices near Harrisburg and then near Philadelphia. So we have a statewide presence. We work on the Delaware Estuary, the Chesapeake Bay, and here on Lake Erie.
Awesome. Okay, so the last time we spoke, you talked about invasive organisms in trade. And can you remind us of what that term means?
Sure. So last time we spent a good portion talking about organisms in trade. So this is aquatic invasive species, so species that aren't supposed to be here that tend to get moved around by human means. And so specifically looking at organisms in trade, that's a pathway of movement for these species. So we're talking about species that are being moved around for either human consumption as food or recreational uses as bait or hobbies, like at pet stores, people buy fish and turtles as pets, or even for use in things like water gardens. Mm-hmm. Those are all considered to be organisms in trade pathways.
Okay, and so these are not accidents. It's not like the zebra mussels where, we're accidentally, transporting our boat from one body of water to another one. This is, something that we can make a conscious decision about, as a consumer then, I'm not going to buy that pet at the pet store, or I'm not going to eat this particular food, right?
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's, there's a kind of plant this, not that mentality when buying things for gardens or for water gardens, because a lot of times you might not mean to introduce something, but let's say you have a water garden and a heavy flood comes and a lot of the things get washed out. Those can get washed into water bodies. You can choose to have pets, but it's also important to remember that there's responsibility that goes with that. So we're not saying don't buy the goldfish, don't buy the turtle, but to have that understanding that these are things that should not be released into the environment if you can no longer care for them. So that's a lot of what we've kind of been talking about with our stakeholders and pet owners and aquarium owners, is that, being responsible and not releasing is kind of the key in being able to have these things.
Absolutely. Okay, so this presents an issue because you want to support economies. Again, people need to be able to sell that food or to sell, something at the pet store, but you need to prevent the spread.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So not cutting it out altogether, especially with aquariums, that's like super popular. I mean, we're not saying don't have aquariums, but just to have that knowledge base there to, make sure that you're doing the right thing. Bait is another thing. And so we work with a lot of bait shops to say, hey, you have these bait, a lot of it looks like, when like a goby, for example, is small, it looks like a lot of other bait fish. And so working with them to identify what's in their bait tanks and being able to remove those so that they're not selling accidentally aquatic invasive species. So that's another example too.
And we've talked about this before, but sometimes when you purchase that pet, it seems like, this is a really cute, easy first-time starter pet. And yet that pet can live 35 years. Exactly. And your child has since grown out of the house, gone to college, and you're still taking care of that pet.
That's a really common scenario. I think last time we talked a little bit about the red-eared slider turtle, but that's always the example that comes to mind because they're so cute when they're little. You bring them home and they can grow to be over 10 inches in diameter, so they kind of outgrow the space you're originally planning for them. And oftentimes they outlive their welcome. They can live up to about 30 years or so in captivity. activity. And so once little Timmy goes off to college, you know, the parent is there with that species and says, oh, I just don't really want to know what to do with this anymore. I think the best thing for this species is to put it out into the waterway. And that's where that kind of misconception is that we try to talk about.
Mm-hmm. And so this leads me into our next thing. What are you working on lately?
Yeah, so we're really excited about this. We have been doing what we're calling pet Amnesty Events. And so this is in partnership with the Erie Humane Society and then an organization out of Cleveland, Ohio called Herps Alive. And so what we do is offer an opportunity for pet owners that have these pets that they're not quite sure what to do with. They want to do the right thing, but they also can't take care of this pet for whatever reason, to bring that pet in to a safe space and surrender that pet. So the Herps Alive Foundation, they are able to take and oftentimes rehome the species. That's the number one goal, is to try to get them a new home. Mm-hmm. If they're unable to do that, they take them back to their sanctuary and they stay there. It's like a no-kill shelter, and they're kept there until either they outlive their lives or they're able to be rehomed.
Right, and I'm sure that's a big concern for people, because you did take care of this, again, I'm just gonna go with a turtle, but for such a long time, but now, like you said, it's outlived its welcome. I don't wanna see it be put down,
yes,
but I also don't want to take care of it anymore.
There is that emotional attachment. Yeah, absolutely. There's no judgment. We actually appreciate and respect that someone's taking those steps instead of just kind of dumping it out into a waterway. It's a lot safer to be surrendered humanely than to be dumped out into the environment.
Okay, so where and when is the next event?
Yep, so it's going to be May 21st. From 11 to 3 at the Erie Humane Society. We're also planning to host one in the fall, and we're hoping this is something we can continue. So hopefully a spring event and a fall event. The more people hear about it, then they can kind of plan and say, oh, you know, I have this species, but it's the middle of the summer. What do I do? Either waiting till fall, or we can always call Herps Alive in Cleveland, and his name's Keith. He's been great about working with individuals to meet them halfway, or to have them dropped off, or working with us to have them dropped off. So we can do that too.
Okay, so when we're at the event, and we've brought the turtle or whatever, and I want to ask that question, what other animals or reptiles do you see?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because a lot of times we're talking about aquatic invasive species, but what's important to note here is there are other critters that live in aquariums, and Keith is able to accept those animals as well. So in our last event, we saw more of the turtles and the goldfish, but we are able to take snakes and lizards and really anything that's living in an aquarium. We're not taking the warm and fuzzies like the bunnies and the dogs and the cats, but more of those aquarium-based species, whether they're terrestrial or aquatic.
And I'm glad you brought up the goldfish example. I know that there was the really large goldfish that was on display at the Tom Ridge Environmental Center. And correct me if I'm wrong, but goldfish can grow very large depending on the container that they're given. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we actually tend to see quite a few very large goldfish out in Presque Isle Bay. A lot of times when we're electrofishing or doing different studies, we'll see them come up, and that's when you kind of scoop them up and take them to the Tom Ridge Center for educational purposes. But a lot of people think, well, what's the harm in having a goldfish, out in the water? What's the big deal? What they don't realize is goldfish are actually very harmful to water quality. They actually take their nose and root them into the sediment. They uproot plants, and they cause a lot of turbidity and cloudy water, and they can really impact the water quality.
Okay, all right. So we're going to stay away from the turtles, the goldfish, like you said, some of those snakes, and just really, I think, before, the kids ask for this particular animal, doing, just like you would with a cat or a dog, doing your research on it first.
Absolutely. Whether it's a tiny fish or a large dog, it's really important to be doing your research, understanding what you're getting, knowing the lifespan and knowing the proper care for that species. And then again, being responsible enough to find an alternate source if you no longer are able to care for that animal.
Absolutely. Okay, so why is releasing an aquarium pet such a problem?
Yeah, so anytime you release anything or anytime you add anything into the ecosystem where it doesn't belong, it's going to have impacts. A lot of times we see that in the form of competing with native species for food or resources, like the red-eared sliders that are on Presque Isle State Park. We have a lot of species of threatened and endangered turtles, and there's a direct competition for basking sites and food and nesting sites. And so there's a huge impact on native species, again, causing harm to the environment through changes in water quality or the way the ecosystem functions is another one of those things.
And what steps, again, besides the pet amnesty event, can pet owners take to ensure that you don't release them into the ecosystem?
Yeah, so there's actually a national campaign called Habitatitude. It's kind of a tongue twister to say, but you might see when you go to like a PetSmart or a Petco, that logo on fish bags or in signs. And really what that is kind of pushing that do not release message and responsible pet ownership, so that if you have something that you're no longer able to care for, they do provide some alternatives. Obviously, the first one is to try to find a pet take-back event, but you can also reach out to pet retailers, local stores. You can reach out to your veterinarian and ask for advice. You can look for local clubs, aquarium clubs, or herp societies, or something local to ask if maybe it's something that you could donate, or even to a school. There's a lot of other options. We try not to jump right to, euthanizing something like a fish, but ultimately it's more responsible to do that at the end of the day if you can't find a place for it. Typically we look at things like plants. If there's a plant that you no longer want, it's more responsible to put it in a bag and put it in the freezer or the trash instead of releasing it into waterways.
And let's talk about that too, because I feel like we focus a lot on, the reptiles and the fish. Let's talk about plants.
Yeah, so we don't take plants back at the take back event. That's more of, if it's something you don't want, it's better to dispose of it properly in the trash, or, making sure that it's not viable anymore. But I do know that this is a huge issue, especially in our area. There's an area in Presque Isle near the lagoon system called Low Bridge, which seems to be a dumping ground we're finding for a lot of different plant species that are commonly found in aquariums. So in the past several years, we've found starry stonewort. We have found water hyacinth and also water lettuce. And those are first-time introductions, a lot of them to the state altogether, but others for the western part of the state. And so most likely they're thinking that this is a kind of a release site for aquariums.
Wow. And so let's talk again how plants can compete with other plants for nutrients and survival.
Absolutely. I mean, plants are the base of the ecosystem there. You've got to have plants in your water body to provide nesting sites and refugia for fish. And if you don't have that, it can have a real impact on the fishery, which is something that we really have here that's important to us. So if we're getting other plant species in, a lot of times these invasive plants, they can actually grow quicker earlier in the year, sometimes blanketing off sunlight and resources from getting down to those native plants below, and they can completely take over a water body. A lot of times they don't provide the same type of nutritional benefit as a food source for fish and waterfowl. And other times they can completely just remove recreational uses from that water body. There's a plant called water chestnut that just is like a blanket over top of a water body. You can't kayak through it or canoe through it. You can't fish, in that area. You can't swim in that area. So a lot of these plants are...
And that's what I want to talk about, those big picture things, So of course we always hammer down like on, the microscopic level, but so just again, just let's reiterate the big picture again, maybe how this affects, recreational users of the lake or what is this doing to the lake on the whole? So let's talk about how it affects fishing and kayaking and recreating. What's going on there?
Yeah, ultimately those are things that are going to change potentially if these things get introduced. And so we spend a lot of time on the prevention side, because another, kind of key aspect of this is once they get introduced, they're very difficult to get rid of. So a place like Pymatuning, for example, they've been having a lot of issues with Hydrilla, which is probably one of the worst invasive plants, and it's something we don't want to see here, but it really takes over a water body. It grows like 1 inch per day, which is way faster than a lot of the native plants. So like I said, it's one of those that comes up faster and outcompetes everything. Wow. There was another species of plant there called Eurasian water milfoil, and even the Hydrilla is outcompeting the milfoil, which is an invasive species in itself. So frogbit is another one. So they're dealing with a lot of aquatic plants, and Pymatuning is important recreationally.
Yes.
So they're really spending just thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars trying to control the plant. And it's very difficult to do that, especially because a lot of them can reproduce through fragmentation. So you just take one little piece, you throw it someplace else, and it's growing a whole new population.
Right, right. Through my studies in college, we spent a day on Presque Isle in waders, cutting back some of the invasive reeds that were along Presque Isle, and oh my gosh, it felt like we didn't make a dent. And there was at least 20 to 30 of us out there for hours cutting these back. And I just want to, again, just touch on the resources, the manpower, the money spent on trying to mitigate something that, you may spend an entire day or a week or a season trying to mitigate it and reverse the effects, only for sometimes it feels like to come back stronger.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you can't expect to, have a control or a treatment method and have it work in a year. We're talking years and years of dedicated resources and manpower, as you said, to try to even cut back the population by a certain percentage each year. It takes a really long time, especially, I mentioned fragmentation, but also things like Hydrilla. They have what's called tubers, which are in the soil, and they can survive in the soil for 17 to 20 years. So you have to try to control, before that tuber growth, because once you get that bank in the soil, you might think that the plants are gone and then they just completely grow back.
They come back.
Yeah.
So Pennsylvania Sea Grant, you guys are based a lot on grant funding. Is a lot of your work research-based and education-based, or do you get grant funding to try to mitigate the situation too?
So we're kind of a three-legged stool. We do research, education, and outreach, and so we kind of span the gamut of the types of work that we do. We work a lot in the prevention space as far as doing education and outreach on invasive species, because again, if you can prevent them from getting in the first place, you're saving yourself a lot of money and resources. My colleague, Tom Cermak, actually leads up the cooperative weed management area for Lake Erie region. And so they focus a lot on control and management of invasive species. So we really do span, the gamut when it comes to invasive species. We also do a lot of work with rapid response, so helping agencies to respond in a coordinated manner. They're communicating with each other. They know what to do when a new species is found, so that we can, as soon as possible, kind of jump on things and take care of it before it really can take hold and take off.
Right. And so you want to be on the lookout as a recreator here on Lake Erie or on Presque Isle, and to report. If you see something, say something. Why is that so important?
Absolutely. Because it's incredibly important, because as I mentioned, once things take hold, they're really, really difficult to control after the fact. So the sooner that we can find something, the better it is for everybody involved. So we have tried to work really hard to provide reporting mechanisms that are easy to use, that people can access. One of the new things that we put out this year is a reporting hotline. This is actually something that was in existence prior with the Department of Agriculture, but it was only for plants and insects. There wasn't an aquatic invasive species option. So we created the 1-833 invasive, without the E on the end, hotline. So if you call that, there's an option that you can press for invasive, aquatic invasive species. You press that and you get sent to a mailbox where you can submit your report, and it goes directly to our Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator through the Fish and Boat Commission. So it goes exactly where it needs to go, and then we can take action on it.
And then, so tell me, when somebody goes to report, let's just say we're fishing maybe, and we see something and it looks out of the ordinary, what's the next step on the report? What if you don't know exactly what you're seeing, but you know it's not right?
That's okay. And that's the whole see something, say something kind of mentality. If something doesn't feel right, it's okay to go ahead and report that. So if you happen to have the Pennsylvania Aquatic Invasive Species Field Guide app, which I'll put a plug in front of that, right now we have the Apple version. You can search for it under PAAIS, and we're currently getting funding for the Android version. So that should be out by the end of the summer. But that actually has a reporting mechanism right in it. So if you're out in the field, you can bring up that app. There's probably 60 some different species profiles. So you can kind of look and say, does this look like anything in this guide? If it does, that can kind of help you get an idea to what it is. If not, it's still okay to report. You can take a picture of it. It allows you to input all of the information and submit that report, and that also gets sent directly to that aquatic invasive species coordinator. If you don't have the app, taking as many notes as possible about the location and what you think you found, taking pictures, and then calling that hotline.
Okay, so we've got the hotline, we have the app. Is there anything else?
Yeah, there's also on the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission website, there is a reporting form there as well. So that's another option.
Okay, great. And then what other cool projects do you guys have on the horizon?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of really interesting things right now. One that I would love to talk about is actually called the Unwanted Dead or Alive Aquatic Invasive Species Draft Series. So we've partnered with Penn State and some of the researchers there, as well as the Erie Brewing Company, to start making invasive species themed beers. We have actually done 2 of these already. So last summer we created the Mystery Snail Ale. The mystery snail is one of the invasive species that we have here, and one of the researchers at Penn State is doing a lot of really cool research there. So we highlighted it, created that beer. We had a kind of a party. People came out. They were able to guess the mystery flavor of that beer, and it wasn't snail. People were like, does this taste like snail? No, it was actually cinnamon bun, but it tasted really good. And we had mystery snail races, and people were kind of betting on which mystery snail they wanted to win, and they learned all about invasive species.
Right.
We had the Round Goby Rye, which we had a party for in December, and just this past St. Patrick's Day, we put out a green beer called the Hazy Hydrilla. So next, we're planning to have a little bit of a mini beer festival that's also in May. That's going to be May 7th at the Erie Brewing Company, and we're going to be highlighting four new invasive species themed beers. So we're asking everyone to come out. There'll be games, all kinds of things, and learning about invasive species.
Right, so we've paired fun with education.
Absolutely, that's the way to do it.
Perfect, that is perfect. And so what do we do to prevent the spread?
Yeah, so we already kind of talked about what pet owners can do to responsibly not spread or not release invasive species, but there's things anyone can do. I feel like most people use water bodies at some point in their life, whether they're anglers or boaters or waterfowl hunters, scuba divers, even teachers in classrooms that have tanks with fish or turtles in them. There's all things that we can do. So for a lot of people that are recreating out on our water bodies, doing things like cleaning, draining, and drying. And I'll go through kind of what that means for each of them. So cleaning is essentially just using your eyes as a visual to look. Do you have plants or mud or anything attached to your boat that you don't want to carry from one place to another? And it's simply just removing it. Some people take their stuff to a car wash, if you're able to pull your boat through a car wash and clean it off that way. Sometimes it's literally just looking and picking it off.
And then dry, how long does your boot or your waders or how long does something need to dry before we kill off those organisms?
So these are aquatic organisms. So drying is really one of the best ways that you can desiccate them and prevent the spread, because they're not viable anymore. However, some of these species can survive for quite a long time out of water. For example, zebra mussels can survive up to 5 days on a boat. And so that's a lot of how people anticipate that they moved from the eastern part of the country out west and got introduced, because they were just alive on these boats that were moving. And so it's really important that if you are going to rely on the dry method, that you're not putting your boat into the water again for at least 5 days.
Okay.
And that's for non-absorbent materials. If you're an angler and you have felt-soled waders where those things stay wetter longer, species can kind of harbor in there, so that it's you wait until they're completely bone dry to the touch, wait another 48 hours before you use that equipment again.
Okay, so we only have just a couple minutes left. What resources can our viewers go to to learn more information about everything we just talked about?
Sure. So our website, seagrant.psu.edu, has a ton of information on it. We have fact sheets on pretty much all the invasive species that you can think of for the state, and even some who aren't here yet. They're more like watch species, so you can kind of learn about them there. You can access the field guide right there on the website. We've also been working on pulling together some YouTube videos. We have kind of a basic Aquatic Invasive Species 101 video right now, but we're about to put out one on organisms and trade. So if you want to brush up a little bit more on organisms and trade, and then we'll have a couple more videos coming out later this year as well. So that's another place to get that information. I also mentioned the field guide. We do have hard copies of those. So if people are really interested in getting one of those, they can contact me and I'm happy to send them one of those. We're actually in the process of updating that resource right now. So there'll be some new copies out very, very soon.
That's fantastic. You guys do such great work. And I really want to thank you for being on the show here today.
Thank you so much.
Viewers, we learned a lot about the aquatic invasive species. They are really harmful to Lake Erie, to our ecosystem, and really then to our economy. So we need to make sure that, like I said, we are washing and drying off our equipment or our boats before we transfer them to another body of water so we don't continue to spread anything. But feel free, like I said, to go to Pennsylvania Sea Grant, to their website and to their YouTube channel to brush up on aquatic invasive species and other environmental topics that they have to offer and educate us on. Thank you for tuning into the Millcreek Government Channel, and until next time, have a great day.